apologize. If you're sitting on the side, you can't vote. We don't have enough clickers unless you manage to procure one. There's a couple seats here with voting rights. Ed, Dinesh, you want to raise your hand? We have four or five seats there. If you want to vote, sit next to these people, because there are not clickers on the side. Tori, you don't want to vote? There are 5 seats right there with voting rights. Okay. So welcome to the closing plenary of the 12th Asia Clean Energy Forum. My name is Peter DuPont. I'm the co-chair, standing in for the incredible chair, Priyantha Wijayatunga. And we have a great program this afternoon. I will walk you through it. First, we're going to hear about you. We're going to do an audience poll. That's why I want everyone to exercise their democratic rights. Second, we're going to have a panel reflecting the lessons observed and learned this week from the thematic tracks, led by Ashok Bhargava, the energy director for the East Asia department. After that, we're going to have 3 inspiring keynote presentations, which will leave you with a lot of food for thought. And you can't leave until the next thing, which is the iPad giveaway. Okay, so you at least have to stay until we are giving away 8 iPads, and Priyantha will be running that, and then we'll have final remarks from ADB. So I'd like to start with the audience survey. First question. Wait, so so how you use your clicker? So the first thing you do is press OK. And if you're not OK, you're in trouble, but just press OK, try that. And then you press the number when the question comes up. Okay? Everybody got it? Okay, so the first question. Please indicate the sector you belong to, and we'll give you about 10 seconds to answer. 3, 2, 1. Can we see the result? Wow, so that's interesting. 40% government. And so that one of our KPIs this year was to get more government officials, so I think we achieved that, Priyantha. Private sector is pretty good. We only got 10% banks or investors. We're on the low side with that. It's hard to get them to come to Manila. Maybe one year we're going to have it in Singapore. So, okay, next question. Please indicate where you are from. 10 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Can we see the result? Okay, this is actually pretty similar to last year, dominated by Southeast Asia and South Asia. Okay, anybody here from Africa? We've had Africa. Do we have anybody here? Okay, next question. How many ACEFs have you attended? 10 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Result? Okay. So this means ADB is going to have to build a new wing, because if we have 60% new people next year, Yongping, we're already at capacity. Okay. Anyway, Yongping's happy. VP's happy. Good. So, let's see. Well, 10%, that's pretty good. There's about 25% who've been here at least 3 times. Next question. Did you attend any of the deep dive workshops? 10 seconds. So we started the deep dive workshops about 4 years ago, as a way of getting more organizations involved, and since then our attendance has gone from about 700 or 800 to about 1,500, which it is this year, from 63 countries. 3, 2, 1, okay. So most people did. Next question is, how do you rate them? Now be honest. 3, 2, 1. This is a really dangerous question to ask in public. I was pretty confident you guys would be satisfied. Thank you for, who are those neutral people? Okay. The very dissatisfied, you should not be here. You should be sitting on the side, not able to vote. Okay. Next question is, how do you rate the main forum? So the main forum is, over the past 2.5 days, since the opening plenary on Tuesday afternoon, the parallel tracks and the knowledge networking. 3, 2, 1. Okay, great job. See, the very dissatisfied went down by 1.9%. Okay, now, what is your primary reason for attending the forum? Three, 2, 1. Okay, so you're just here for knowledge. Nobody's looking for money? Come on, I don't believe you guys. Okay, next. Next question. What is the primary area of the clean energy sector that you work in? Now, where's Tom Dreesen? Tom is always upset that there's usually like energy efficiency is at 20%. We'll see if we can top that. We had Melanie here from IEA. We had a robust deep dive workshop. We have Mark Lister from the Copenhagen Center. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Energy efficiency is stuck at 18%. So renewable energy access. Okay, and 2 more. What are the functional areas that you spend most of your time working in? Okay. 3, 2, 1. Wow, I would not expect policy and regulation to be quite so high. Very interesting. Okay, so now, this last question, I just got a lot of abuse because we're about to ask the track chairs to come up and talk about the lessons from their tracks. This last question is which track was most relevant to you? So it is a dangerous question, but why don't you go ahead and answer it? And 3, 2, 1. Oh, I like that. Very evenly distributed. Energy efficiency is still under 20%. See, Tom, if you had been sitting over here, and Toru, if you'd been sitting there, we would have been at 20.1. Yeah. Okay, we'll do a revote. Okay, so all fun aside, it's sort of nice to see the community. This is the Asia Clean Energy community. Some people like to say this is the premier clean energy event in the region. I don't like to say that because I like to be humble, and I say it's one of the best, even though we know it's really the best. So I'm going to invite Ashok Bhargava up now, and I will introduce you, if you could stay seated for just one moment. He's the chair of the Energy Sector Committee, director of the Energy Division for East Asia Department, and he oversees energy sector operations in PRC in Mongolia. He has 33 years of energy sector experience. You look so young. He specializes in innovative low-carbon technologies such as energy efficiency, distributed renewable energy, run-of-river IGCC, carbon capture and storage, and shale gas. And he is an Australian national. So I'd like also the panelists to please take the stage at this time. And Ashok, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, let me congratulate you to make up to the closing session of this Clean Energy Forum. When I read the Asia Clean Energy Forum 2017, the future is here, achieving universal access and climate targets. I must admit I was a bit nervous reading that, because let me give you some sobering numbers which may or may not stack up against that particular bold statement. In terms of energy efficiency, we are investing less than 1/3 of what we should invest in energy efficiency. So it's a gross underinvestment, despite the fact that it's a low-hanging fruit, if it is, and the payback periods are pretty short. Renewable energy, there are exciting developments around renewable energy almost every week or month, where we hear in particular market, the tariffs are much lower than before. But despite that fact, if I just take the case of China, and not for any particular reason, but the fact that China is doing much more than perhaps anybody else when it comes to renewable energy development. China has the largest wind power capacity, and I think now the solar capacity. Yet together, the electricity produced by wind and solar is only 5%. 4% from wind and 1% from solar. So we have a long, steep curve ahead of us if we really have to transform the energy sector. Energy access, and I think this is a dark shadow over our region, when millions and millions of people, even in today's term, are without access to electricity and modern energy. Progress has been made, but the fact remains a large number are in this region. And the last is managing the transition. I think this is going to be a challenge for the energy community, and we will look into that. So to help me understand, and I hope for you also, how the future is here in each of these areas, we have some distinguished panelists. Let me start off with asking Melanie on his take on energy efficiency track.
Thank you, Ashok. And thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. During the energy efficiency track, we were reminded that the opportunity for energy efficiency is far greater than the action that's currently being taken. And while organizations like the ADB have been investing in energy efficiency in Asia for 50 years, the opportunity is still there to do much more. And we've seen remarkable improvements in countries like China and India, partly due to that support. But it's essential that the least developed countries don't get left behind. And the impression is that that's what's happening at the moment. So even though energy efficiency is a huge opportunity for meeting sustainable development goals and NDCs, only about 30% of the world's energy consumption is currently covered by mandatory energy efficiency policy, which is proven time and time again to be extremely cost effective. So this, and in this region, it's even lower than that. So there's this huge opportunity to go for. There's a role of organizations like ADB to scale up public and private sector investment, to pilot and experiment and prove market-based mechanisms for ensuring that more energy efficiency happens and it happens faster. That's the bit we probably all knew before we came. I think the thing that struck me most about the conversations is that in this digital world that we find ourselves in, there are a huge number of small-scale, very entrepreneurial activities going on that are individuals or groups of individuals taking actions based on their preferences. And this is something that's being enabled by changing technology. So we have examples like the city of Seoul, where you have a very visionary mayor who has mobilized the citizens to reduce dependence on nuclear power, because that's something that matters to him and to them. And in order, this has been a very sort of consensual, stakeholder-based process to try and engage everybody. And one of the things I found great about that was the balcony-sized solar panels, so that even apartment dwellers were able to do their bit and have their actions count. And then at the other end of the scale, we had an example from the Himalayas, where villages were being electrified for the first time, and that was bringing them economic opportunity and opportunities to learn. And in this case, the scale was only dictated by the weight of a solar panel that the donkey could carry into the villages through the mountain passes. But the message I take from this is that we're kind of almost moving into a paradigm where we can crowdsource energy efficiency or energy services. You know, we're in a position where the big actors, the ADBs of this world, hopefully the IEAs supporting organisations like ADB can have an impact. But we're moving into a world where everybody's action can be made to count. So that to me was the kind of new thing, the remarkable thing about this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie, for those thoughts. And I thought this crowdfunding for energy efficiency, if that could happen, that would really make a difference. Let's move on. Now, Cindy, it's your turn to talk about renewable energy.
Thank you, Ashok. I'd like to share this closing with my co-chairs from IRENA, Mr. Gobul and Yong Chen, who unfortunately cannot come at the forum itself. So in this track for renewable energy, it's a very wide range of topics that we needed to cover. So we made sure we come up with the most innovations in terms of the topics and the speakers and the coverage of the countries that the speakers will talk about in terms of business models, in terms of applications, and in terms of actual case studies that have happened in the recent years. So the track actually covered 5 sessions, from system planning, making sure that we meet our access and climate objectives. And the second track focused on end-use sectors. Another track focused on rooftop solar, a lot of innovations happening there. The fourth track covered also some new generation policies in renewables. So I'd like to point some highlights from each session in the RE track. So the first session on system planning, it highlighted the launching of the World Bank Global Solar and Wind Atlas. So this is available online now, where you can find resource assessments for both solar and wind, and it's very interactive. And this can be used for identifying top sites where you can do site-specific measurements to do projects. And the two presentations focused on greening the grid, where they highlighted that high RE penetration is feasible. And for example, in India, they have 100 gigawatt and solar and 60 gigawatt solar targets, and they said that they can have an average of 1% national. Philippines, up to 50% penetration, particularly for the Luzon and Visayas grid for variable renewables. But the session highlighted the need to make sure that systems are reliable, and its response to extreme events must be very quick, because right now system planning not only should consider mitigating climate change, but also adapting to the actual impacts of climate change itself. I mean, our countries suffer from typhoons, cyclones, and extreme weather events like lightning and flooding. So our systems will also need to be planned to be able to be resilient and adapt to these changing climate. The second session focused on job creation in RE, and I think the main point there was that it's not only should focus on giving jobs, but actually giving decent jobs that have benefits, for example. It's not only about quantity, but quality. The third session focused on solar rooftop, and we all know that this is a booming market at this stage, and And of course, we will have economies of scale at some point as more and more people are adapting, or more and more industries, in fact, also include rooftop solar. And in fact, I myself have solar on my rooftop, practicing what we are preaching. So this is really a very emerging market, and there's a lot of innovations happening in many of our countries, like in Sri Lanka, where they have low-interest loan scheme ventures, they have rental schemes for the industries, and they have even up to standardization of equipment. The fourth session focused on the end-use sectors. RE applications in the end-use sector is not as large-scale or not as highly developed as, of course, in the power sector. But this is one of the most important applications that we need to consider more in terms of RE applications for mitigation and also for opportunities, in fact, for protecting, for example, our women. And that's why we wanted to highlight a session here on women-led enterprises, because women are most vulnerable and most affected by energy poverty. So there's a lot of end-use applications happening in Bangladesh. There's a lot of innovation happening there. They are piloting solar-powered transport on ferry boats. They have mini cold storage for off-grid areas and even solar cooking technologies. IRENA also sees a lot of opportunities in the industry. 60 to 70% of energy use come from fuel combustion in the industry, and mitigation costs are highest in buildings and industry, so there's a lot of opportunities there as well for innovations. And they highlighted that delaying the action on climate mitigation will result in $10 trillion in costs associated with stranded assets. The session also highlighted the importance of productive energy uses for women-led enterprises, as I mentioned earlier. And productive end use in general is also highlighted there. And there are preconditions for successful deployment of PEUs. And knowledge and capacity building, and of course, consumer behavior is always the start in terms of getting more mitigation or more innovations in end-use sector for renewables. And last but not least, the last session focused on new generation of RE policies. A lot of lessons there, particularly for off-grid in terms of new generation policies. Indonesia highlighted that their new policy, in fact, may also be lacking in terms of the approach that it has taken. It's more top-down rather than bottom-up, and there's a lot of improvements that still can be done. Another presenter talked about RE tenders for off-grid projects in particular, and they highlighted the key lessons there to be able to have a successful bid. I mean, the trend now is going for RE auctions and tenders rather than just competitive bidding or, okay, my time's up, sorry. So essentially, one of the other thing that I wanted to highlight there was the, I guess, the lack of success in the CDM and how, new generation carbon should be, carbon finance should be considered in terms of policies, and that the CDM was very rigid and complex, and that simplicity is always the ultimate sophistication. That's all.
Thank you, Cindy. And let's move on now to Soma, Dutta, about energy access track.
Thank you, Ashok. Good afternoon, everyone. So I was sharing this track together with Jeevan, who's sitting there. And so we had what, I think about 18% of the audience, but I thought the noise levels, the discussions was really vibrant for that percentage. So we discussed 5 themes, starting with government policy, financing at the last mile, multipliers effect of electricity, issues surrounding urban energy, and finally we had a very, very interesting session where women entrepreneurs from the field presented their experiences. That was this morning. So in terms of major trends, we have, I think, plenty to pat ourselves on the back about as far as access is concerned, especially as far as electricity access is concerned. There's been an unprecedented progress in access. And between 2012 and 14, 93.1 million people gained access in the region. The rural-urban divide, however, continues, even in electricity access. Access to clean cooking remains a fairly sad story, I would say, with more than 2/3 of the world population without access to clean cooking in Asia Pacific. India, Bangladesh, and a couple of other countries form the crux of this problem. There are several reasons for this, but one of the reasons, or maybe it's a reflection, is also the rather lack of policy commitment. While there's been a lot of discussion, at least in the last few years, about clean cooking at the global level, we find that this is not really translated into solid policy commitments and, more importantly, backed by investment, long-term investment commitments at the country level. So, for example, we have the global tracking framework data showed that there are 42 countries with energy access targets, and majority of them are in the electricity sector. There are just a few countries that actually have access on clean cooking. Nepal is an exception. Sustained investment in the Chinese biogas sector is an exception. India's Ujjwala scheme, which is to get millions of LPG connections to the poor in the next few years, is one. The third major trend is urbanization. Again, Asia Pacific, highest amount of urbanization taking place here, which really will drive, and which, like I said before, that the last mile now is not necessarily the rural, poor, remote, living in mountainous regions. It is also the huge numbers of people who are unserved and underserved in urban slums, for example. Another important trend is that the economic disparities are not going away anywhere, in spite of the increase in access. And at this point, I think the biggest plus is that renewable energy, especially solar, is finally become a real possibility, a real solution that can be used for mass-scale energy access, even at the last mile. So that's a great thing. So what are we trying to solve at this point? And we had a fairly big discussion characterizing what this last mile is. Who are these 421 million people? So like I said, they're not just the rural and remote, but they're also urban and underserved people. The second point that came up time and again was scale. And I'm actually rather dismayed that people like Simpa, Seva, Gham Power, ENERGIA, PACT, Myanmar, all of us are making these presentations over and over again. We are still at a few thousands or few tens of thousands numbers. So why are we not scaling up? We are just not able to do that. So we have the group came up with a few suggestions for scaling up. And scaling up, we discuss in two areas. One is scaling up in terms of increasing the individual demand, and second is scaling out. How do you get more in terms of numbers? So, so in terms of way ahead then, the 3 or 4 major recommendations that the community came out with. The first is almost a plea to the governments and also to ADB to prioritize clean cooking. If you look at investments, if you look at the emphasis, the priority on clean cooking is still not happening, and that really needs to be ramped up. We need much larger programs. We need organizations like ADB to support national governments to come up with concrete policies, to come up with roadmaps to do clean cooking, to make that an attractive sector. And I really think that organizations like ADB have a huge role to play there. NDCs. The second point is the NDCs at this point, guided by climate objective, provide a huge opportunity where energy access can be a co-benefit. It is not really being looked at in that manner, but it could provide a huge opportunity that we must ride on, otherwise we miss the boat. Thirdly, what does an good energy access strategy look like? So the group came up with 2 major elements. First is it has to be an ecosystem approach. it is technology just one element in the whole jigsaw puzzle. There is community, there's social sustainability, finance, but all of that. And the second is about this multiplier effect of energy access. While there were plenty of presentations on what energy can do, it is felt that where it is really happening is at a very small anecdotal kind of level. And two things there. First is cross-sectoral linkages. So we need to go out and talk to the agriculture sector, horticulture sector, animal husbandry, and all of that, women's empowerment. So energy is an input into all of that. And secondly, the social rate of return of access needs to be captured better, to be benchmarked better. We also think that there's merit in investing in women and other local communities in energy access, not just as recipients, but also as people who can really take energy access programs and technologies to the last mile. In taking access work to the last mile, there is clearly a need to de-risk. And it is an operation that is high in terms of transaction costs. It is considered risky. So there is definitely an immediate need to de-risk these operations. There's a need to work with the financial sector directly to develop loan projects that are aligned better with the needs of the people who are unserved instead of the regular monthly repayment kind of thing. So it is also important to build basically a pipeline of energy access, let's say entrepreneurs or demand or all of that together, which makes it attractive for the financial sector. And that aggregation is not happening enough. Someone has to do that. Finally, I would say that there is also a need to ensure that policy and an impacts assessment is really based and informed on research and credible data. There is some amount of data collection happening, but much more needs to happen, even to just demonstrate that energy access can have multiplier effects, can go a much longer way than just providing a light bulb to a family. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And now let me invite Dan Millison to talk about managing this transition and what are future trends and emerging issues.
Thank you, Ashok. We had a very interesting track. We focused on three topics, really: the energy transition, managing the transition, the food, energy, water, resilience nexus, and technology innovation. And I was happy to see the results on the survey, and I want to thank Madam Wei-Ni Chen for helping organize the topical content and sessions and recruiting speakers. One of the findings, there is an energy transition that's happening, and it may not be obvious to some people, but it should be. This is part of the fourth industrial revolution, and it's unstoppable. Two of the key characteristics that we see is the digitization of everything. This is a key thing in the fourth industrial revolution, and it's the digitization and the fusion of technologies. A second aspect is electrification of everything. So we're seeing electrification of transport, more electrification of some industrial processes. This is going to be very, very significant. I think we'll see a lot in the next few years in electrified transport, both for battery and maybe hydrogen fuel cell vehicles as well. A couple of outcomes, we see that there's decentralization and democratization of energy that go along with decarbonization. Decarbonization, in my opinion, now is a given. It's going to happen. It's going to take a while, but I think it's going to happen faster than anybody in this room believes it will. And let me give you an example. 100 years ago, when Ford opened up the factory to make the Model T, in New York City, the primary form of transport was, public transport was horses. And the rate limiting factor on adding more horses on the streets in New York City, the rate limiting factor was the speed at which you could remove horse poop from the streets. Now, after the Model T came into the market, in less than 15 years, horses had disappeared from the streets of New York City. So things can happen a lot faster than we think, and the fourth industrial revolution, there is going to be a lot of disruption. In the Food, Energy, Water Resilience Nexus, we had a couple of great presentations on vertical and urban farming, and I want to give special mention to Stella Leo, who's a Fulbright scholar that I met earlier this year, and if you don't believe that urban and vertical farming are commercial and can make a huge difference, you need to talk to Stella and you need to talk to Ralph Becker. We can do a whole lot more with a lot less water and a lot less fertilizer and a lot less energy. The findings on Stella's research project, based on experience in Singapore on commercial activities, we can get 10 times more productivity using 90% less water and 70% less fertilizer, and this is climate-proof food production. We also heard from an entrepreneur who's got technology that extracts water vapor from the atmosphere and produces pure water. It's solar-powered, it's self-powered, it can be off-grid, it's off-grid. 4 of the units are on the roof. There's a dispenser on the second floor over here now. We can do 100% climate-proof drinking water, and it's affordable. It's affordable because so many people that are in water-stressed areas that don't have access to safe water are drinking bottled water, and this is cheaper than bottled water. We also heard a great presentation on how to make sustainable building materials from seawater, an idea that was first published in 1979, but that's never been attempted at scale. I think we now have the beginnings of a business model to make this happen. On technology innovation, we talked about some specific technologies and low temperature geothermal, a huge, Tom, if you think energy efficiency is a missed opportunity, man, that's small compared to the possibilities for low temperature geothermal. Floating solar, the hydrogen economy, again, the digitization of everything, the advent of Internet of Things and blockchain is definitely going to continue to drive the change, and things will change faster than we can. I mean, the idea that we can forecast anymore, and I don't want to criticize IEA and some of the other people that presented forecasts, but I find a lot of it highly skeptical. There's an adage, all forecasts are wrong, some are useful, and that very much applies in the fourth industrial revolution. We had a little bit of discussion about technology innovation and what ADB should be doing, and ADB and its peer institutions. And I don't want to criticize the people that I work for as a consultant, but I did work here for 5 years as a regular employee, and I've had a lot of interaction with other multilateral development banks and the work I've done in the climate finance community. And I would say they're all guilty of the same sins. So a few recommendations here. ADB needs to mobilize smart money. The institution needs to be smarter about how it invests. And one example, if it's not obvious from what I said already, ADB, instead of investing in traditional agriculture, trying to help farmers get richer, which the bank has been doing for 50 years, and I don't think it's helped that much, we should invest in urban and vertical farming, and then come up with another intervention for the rural population, maybe energy farming, right? ADB needs to be able to take a little bit more risk, and I'm not suggesting trying to act as a venture capital, private equity type organization, but just use a little bit of the grant resources that are available to support technology innovation through pilot projects, and the president did announce a fund, and hopefully that will be successful. But there are some other institutional things that need to be changed up. But the main thing institutionally is that there's a zero failure mentality that needs to change. We need to learn from the Silicon Valley philosophy that it's okay to fail, and so ADB needs to learn how to fail, and learn how to fail early, and learn how to fail gracefully. Thanks.
So thank you, Dan. And that's all from the speakers. You heard them. Now it's up to you. Please ask questions. We have about 25 minutes for your questions. And what Peter did not mention is that those who ask questions have double the chance to get iPad. So please do come forward and ask your questions. Do I see a hand? Nobody's interested in iPad. Well, okay.
I'm interested in an iPad, but I'm more interested in the answer to this.
Please state your name.
Sorry, Bernie Jones from the Smart Villages Initiative. What's really interesting to me is that from our 4 tracks, every single presentation gave information that was relevant to the other 3 tracks as well. So what do you think that means for future conversations of the sort that we've been having over the past few days? And does it make sense to talk about efficiency without actually, say, talking about access and new technology all at the same time?
Yeah. Anybody wants to answer?
You're right, and that was remarkable. But I'd agree. We are seeing that, of course, consumers, industry, commerce want energy services. They don't really care where they come from. Governments want energy security and potentially to meet NDCs and other sustainable development goals. So in order to do that at lowest cost, we have to start talking about the decarbonising the energy system as a whole. And to do that, we need to have policies working in concert together. So I mentioned the Himalayan example, and I was very conscious that I talked about the solar panel. But the point there is that the services can be provided because, along with that, are provided very, very, very low power consumption products. And so it's the integration of those 2 things that enables these projects to happen at reasonable and affordable costs. So that is the way of the future.
If I understand your question, you're saying that from next year onwards, we should probably have integrated sessions, but bring everything together more. I think that is something we should pass on to the organizers and note it down and see how best we can facilitate it. Sorry, go ahead.
My name is Apurva Chaturvedi, and I represent USAID India. I'm a clean energy specialist there. I don't know whether it's a question or not, but I think most of us do agree that energy efficiency probably is the lowest hanging fruit for lowering our carbon footprint and meeting the goals. But most of the talk is actually centered around how to meet the renewable goals, how to increase capacity addition in renewables, what kind of financing is needed, all that follows if you have to up the capacity addition through renewables. Somehow, even the banks like to fund the renewable projects because they see energy efficiency projects as not big ticket items or the transaction costs are too high, et cetera, et cetera. So, we have so many banks here and we have all the esteemed chair here. Can somebody throw some light on this?
Let me address that question. And I think that is something really, really important. And I think IEA projects that 50% of emission reduction or near to that will come from energy efficiency. And to energy professional, you have to be energy efficient first before you look at supply side solution. So I think you have pointed it out very well. And I think that was my question also, where are we failing when it comes to energy efficiency? And I think the answer, perhaps not all, but a large blame goes to financial institutions. Because energy efficiency projects are, by design, small. Investments are small, transaction costs are high. You have to aggregate them to a scale before you can get to a bank. Financing a new project where $200 million investment is, you get applauded at the board. You talk about $5 million investment to improve energy efficiency, I'm not sure whether you're going to get the same effect. I think this is something we really need to work on. But let me also explain what we are doing in China and doing quite successfully, apart from what government has done. We work with the domestic financial institution. ADB or multilaterals on their own cannot solve this problem unless we work hand in hand with local institutions and create a system whereby they learn by doing it that investment in energy efficiency actually pays off. And it's a good business. And then perhaps the discussion at boardroom level will change. But I think this is the problem. And what we need in countries is somebody who can make this project bankable. This financial intermediation or an intermediation is essential when it comes to energy efficiency. But I think this is something we all have to and ought to do more. And I started off by saying that only 1/3 of investment is going in energy efficiency than what it should be. Anybody else want to add?
Thank you. Sorry, hogging this, but Peter pointed out how many more policymakers there were in the room this year than had been in the past. And I'd just like to remind everybody that whilst finance clearly matters hugely, the policy environment does as well. So only 30% of the world's energy consumption is covered by proven, low-cost, the most cost-effective policies available to us. Yet governments aren't implementing those policies. So there is a role, of course, for investment, but there's also a huge role for government. And if you look at, we've heard some great stories, but if you look at some of the most effective energy efficiency policies in the world, China and India are great examples now, they were driven by policy. That's what made them happen. And once the policy was in place, the investment and the action followed. But without the policy, nothing happens.
I guess what ADB has had some success on in terms of energy efficiencies on supply side. I think we all know that's the easier one of this, the lowest hanging fruit. And we have done a lot of energy efficiency in power generation and even in transmission and distribution. And on the demand side, I know it's quite difficult. And I think what we've tried to do is look at the easier part of it, which is maybe changing consumer behavior. And that is done through capacity building, through awareness, and through other soft interventions, not infrastructure. So, but we are trying to go into that as well, but it is difficult.
Yeah, whatever happens at the policy level, I think in energy access initiatives, certainly energy efficiency is the first step. Even if you're doing renewables, you first need to improve the existing operations. And it's even things like a poultry farm where you need to first see what is happening and improve the operations. If you're doing a clean cooking program and introducing a forced-off gasifier cook stove, the efficiency of operations increases immensely if you can also alongside have, let's say, a pressure cooker program. So to me, I think energy access, the first step is doing energy efficiency even in energy access programs. And a lot of it is, like you said, linked to behavioral aspects. So mass awareness programs, even awareness programs of energy access practitioners, I think is very important to first look at this low-hanging fruit before looking at other bigger, more expensive options.
Mr. Chairman, if you would indulge me, I would like to hear Tom Dreesen's question before I follow up.
Are you setting me up or what, Dan? Okay. Yeah, so I have a little bit of a response to this that I wasn't going to say, but I mean, those of you, I heard IEA estimates about EE, they're going to need, what, up to 45 to 50% to get this done. And I'm just here to tell you it's not happening unless there's some game changers that occur, major game changers from an end-use standpoint. I used to think, if you'd heard me speak 5 years ago, I'd have said money's the problem. That's not the problem. The big gap in the marketplace I see, especially with end users, is a skill set to develop projects and sell them and structure them to be financed. Big gap in the marketplace. Because at the end of the day, many of you hear me speak about facility owners. They're the gatekeepers of energy efficiency. And you've got to make it attractive to them. Doesn't matter how great your financing scheme you put together, how well the risk is mitigated. At the end of the day, if it's not attractive to them, doesn't matter. You know, so anyway, that really wasn't my question, but I just had to throw that in there as one of the areas and on the finance side, you know, I think. My question was, I mean, I'd like to see this, the forum getting a little bit more toward best practices and replicable models and success models that people could take away from here. So my question is to each of you, which of those do you think stands out in each of your session as the best model or success that you think, case study, that people could take away and replicate?
You want to start, please?
Yeah. Tom, I didn't set you up. Come on. Tom, but I was in Indonesia a few weeks ago and flew back to Manila and sat next to Tom on the plane. So we actually had a nice discussion about some of the challenges of investing in energy efficiency in Indonesia. So one of the big issues there that I see at the policy and regulatory level is that we still, in most of the world, maybe there's still irrational pricing of energy. I mean, retail electricity tariffs in Indonesia are still, I think all categories are still subsidized. Even though they've been cut a lot, there's a phenomenal waste of money there. There's no reason to do it anymore. I would remind everyone that in 2009, the G20 signed an agreement, the meeting was in Pittsburgh, to phase out fossil fuel subsidies. And that was reconfirmed in 2013, and it still hasn't happened. So if we phased out subsidies, that would be a huge...
Then can I ask you to talk about the key highlight of your session, which is what his question was?
Yeah. Well, one of the points is it's not so much about, I wouldn't say that it's a best practice, but energy efficiency is still a difficult thing to do if we single it out. If we look at industrial energy efficiency, I think it's going to be a lot easier if that's embedded in a cleaner production type project. And we can see an example that's not in Asia really, but using concentrating solar thermal technology to generate steam for enhanced oil recovery in Oman. That's the largest CSP project in the world. It's not in Morocco. It's not in the US. It's not in Chile. It's in Oman, and it's for oil recovery, and it's a cleaner production project. Just quickly, what could ADB try to do? I think there's a big scope to try results-based lending for energy efficiency, where we don't have to go through the fund structuring approach and the financial intermediation approach. We've tried that a lot. ADB's done that a lot, and I don't see it as a game. What has been done through financial intermediation loans, I don't see any game-changing effect yet. And also policy-based loans. Policy-based loans can be used to address the subsidy and pricing issues.
Sorry, that again.
RBL for a new attempt at trying to actually mobilize that financing.
Pass on to Soma.
In access, I would say two things. First is use of mobile telephony for access functions. That, I think, could be the next big thing. We've seen it in GSMA. We've seen it in pay-as-you-go models that are being tried, that have been experimented extensively with in Africa. So that's one. The second big area, I think, is to engage women in last-mile functions of electricity access in large numbers. Women, through their networks, have access to people that other networks don't have. They do not compete with the private sector because they're working at the last mile. They actually complement them. So I think engaging women in large numbers as a central strategy for universal energy access could also be a big thing. And the last, I think, is, again, in access is aggregation of demand, aggregation of finance requirements, to make sure that these become viable packets for financial sector to come in at the last mile. So as a de-risking measures, aggregation of demand and aggregation of requirement for finance, I think, is going to be a key thing.
Cindy.
Thank you, yes. From the renewable energy track, I think what was sobering was the finding in the global tracking framework that the RE, in fact, is the slowest in terms of achieving SDG 7. And I guess to hasten that achievement of the targets, there are at least 3 things that we need to focus on. First, of course, there's technical, and there's financial or financing issues, and there's institutional or regulatory, and that where policies comes in. So on the technical, I'd like to highlight the importance of good data and resource assessment. And I think that was what came out from the first session, where we have already now available maps, for example, for solar and wind, where you can find good data in terms of finding where it is most feasible to actually conduct site-specific measurements and do your feasibility studies. And on system planning as well, it needs to consider sometimes competing objectives of access and climate. Because sometimes you might need to have some more base load there and not necessarily renewables to meet the access objective, whereas you need to be cleaner to be able to meet the climate objectives. So sometimes it is competing, but there needs to be a balance in terms of planning on a system basis. Secondly, on the financing, of course, there are a lot of business models that has been coming in, and a lot of innovations there as well in terms of, for example, businesses pay as you go for off-grid, and so there's also many different types of financing that needs to be done, because you have either on-grid, off-grid, or large scale, or small scale, or distributed, or smart grid. So there's many different ways you can actually innovate in terms of financing. On institutional and policy, we heard that auctions and tenders are now becoming a trend, and EDB is going into that as well. And I guess that's the future, so that we are more independent and free to actually choose our suppliers.
So I mentioned the integration stories that I liked in the previous presentation. So I'll talk about a digitalization story. So the best practices that we saw through the track, I think several of them came from India. One of them's the PAT scheme, the Perform Achieve Trade scheme. One of them's, of course, the work of Energy Efficiency Services Limited. But I'd like to highlight the Standards and Labelling Program in India, which has adopted the kind of digital technology. So leapfrogged lots of other standards and labelling programs around the world. So you have electronic registration system of products, which enables you to actually track progress of products, so you know when to change your standards, because you're automatically monitoring your market. So you used to have to buy lots of data and do lots of testing. It was prohibitively expensive. You've kind of got an automated system for doing that now. That same system allows your regulators to enforce compliance, because they know exactly what's on the market. And it also enables you to inform consumers, so they know what products to buy and what they're going to cost them. So a simple digitalization step helps the manufacturers, the regulators, and the consumers all in one go.
Thank you. I saw a raised hand there before. We have about 7 minutes left, so if you have questions, please raise your hands now and I'll come back to you. So I see another hand here, and there, and there. So we take the 4 questions. First, please.
I'm Dinesh, Chief of Party for the USAID PhD Program India. So I have a couple of comments, including suggestions within that. The first one is that I think we got an excellent session on the skill development and jobs. So I think that could be converted as a separate theme next year. Again, I kind of agree with what Tom said in terms of building the capacity. So I think there are a lot of examples across this continent in terms of how the skill development has been happening. In India, we recently have the Skill Council for Green Jobs has been established, and they're doing a tremendous job in developing skills across the sector. The renewable energy sector and energy efficiency as well. So maybe that's one suggestion. I thought next year we should have a separate thematic session on energy efficiency. Next is definitely a disappointment that there are no investors in this room. For the past 3 days we have been hunting to find a couple of investors. We found one, but it would be really interesting to see how to basically incentivize them to come here. So another suggestion is to open up 1 month before the ASF next week, next year, to have a crowdfunding competition. We can put some energy access projects because they're all small, attractive, and then definitely socially impactful. So if we can open up a 1 month competition for some leading investors to participate in that, and then here we can announce and then try to close a couple of funds. Because right now I have brought a delegation of 3 microfinance institutions who are looking for investments. And now they have to go to Singapore to look for investors. Even the Singapore investors are not willing to come here, basically. So it'll be a great idea if you could try to implement next year.
Thank you for the excellent suggestions, and we do take note of them. The next question. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, sorry, here.
Myself, Anand Shukla. I represent GIZ Indonesia. While going through all the sessions, I was wondering about what do we mean by renewable energy? And I was trying to find linkages between renewable energy, energy efficiency, climate, and jobs. When I think about renewable energy and solar PV, I think, is it renewable? India is talking about hundreds of gigawatts of solar PV basically. And after 25 years, I am worried about it. How do we recycle this big chunk of solar PV panels? Are we prepared for it? And it's until 2022. Further, after 22, it will be further increasing. Few years back, we thought about nuclear energy and coal. And now we are thinking about a solution. Are we prepared for it? When we talk about solar PV, the efficiencies are lower. It doesn't create too much of jobs after it is implemented. But when we talk about solar thermal energy, it creates jobs when it is implemented and also afterwards. Efficiencies are also higher. Recycling is also possible. We can store thermal energy in fashion material or something. But I never see that it is talked about. And I'm sure financing is not at all a problem. There is a lot of money available. There is a lot of intelligent people who can frame policies, but nobody talks about big things. Nobody thinks about big picture. We talk about easy. Solar PV, put on rooftop, I can do it. I don't need to discuss in a big forum of 1,500 people about solar PV. Who is going to talk about big thing? Industry needs heat. In Himalayas, we need heat more than light. But nobody is focusing on solar thermal. India is such a big country which has doubled the radiation in Germany. Solar thermal is missing in India. I would like to understand from you, what is the way forward about it?
I may not have the answer for you, what you're looking for, but let me try to attempt it. Working in China, and I look after China, it is the leader in solar PV. Way back in 2009, ADB started to work on concentrated solar power because we thought this is real energy mix solution. And I still believe it is the energy mix solution. It took us 6 years to work with the government. But last year, government of China launched a program for 20 CSP projects for a capacity of 1.3 gigawatt. So what it requires are, don't expect quick successes when you're talking of something new. You really have to put concerted efforts, find a local champion. And if this thing is right, eventually it will succeed. So I'm not saying we are yet there. CSP has a huge potential, but there are also limitations. CSP cannot be applied in all applications. So I'm not saying either CSP or PV. There is room and a need for all these technologies. So not one at the cost of other. You okay? We go to the next question.
Yes. There was an author.
Sorry, there was the first raise.
Okay, sorry.
And go on, sir.
Ms. Russell DeLucia, I'm a relatively long-term visitor, okay, or participant, okay, in the forum. I remember, I think it's maybe 10 years ago, okay, when the first workshop or group, okay, got together about whether or not there was going to be an access program here, okay, and some of us pushed on it and said that it's so important to get this elephant moving, okay, because without it, okay, it's not going to move in the region, okay. And I need to commend the bank, okay, because when you look from the very first years, okay, the elephant began to move, okay. Yes, it doesn't run and gallop, but it has clearly moved. It went from just the supply side to worrying about productive uses, okay. okay, to actually worry
If you
about...
could keep your mic.
Yeah, okay, I'll
steady.
try and keep my mic close, okay? But I want to remind people about a few things, okay? I would like next year there to be a session, okay, that looks explicitly on the impact of programs, explicitly on the issue of using blended finance, because everybody in this audience, I would argue, okay, if you look at the nexus of water, energy, and resilience, all of which to tackle it, okay, needs either energy or energy, okay, enabled, okay, technologies. And everybody here benefited one way or another from services that were financed, okay, with non-commercial money, either, you know, early ADF money, okay, or IDA money, or whatever. And if we look at collective actions over this period of time, okay, there's been an enormous amount of process. But the kind of issues that were talked about in the difficulty of small projects, whether it's LPGs or tackling the efficiency problems in the informal sector who use almost everything inefficiently. And I want to remind the audience, as I did in the session that I was in, that 70+% of the poor in the world are in this region, okay? Very few of them have been well served and in terms of getting services to them, okay? And it is critical, okay, that those aspects and all the technology and all the programs begin to be looked at much, much more through the lens of poverty alleviation, okay? And my beg is that next year there will be sessions explicitly focused on how one can use blended finance. The bank moves away from just doing silo lending and silo operations that are water or energy here and do it together, okay? So not only will the numbers of not being reached go down, but the horrendous changes in the Gini coefficients across the region. And so inequality is getting worse and worse and worse, okay? Just look at the period between the first forum and today's forum, okay? So next year, let's look a little bit, okay, not just on the technology, but its impact on poverty, okay, the delivery mechanisms, and how we can do a better job on that, okay? Because we've made an enormous amount of progress, but not a lot of that progress, okay, is getting anywhere near the bottom of the pyramid. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. And I just want to tell everyone that if you have any suggestions on how we can do it better, please do tell us, even after this, this closing session. Whenever you have time, do drop us a line, and we can assure you of our attention to your comments. We take one question, and that will end our session. So please.
This is more a question about the future. Roberto Versola from a Philippine nonprofit. George Gilder is a futurist, and he wrote 2 books, Microcosm and Telecosm, where he said that when things become cheap enough, then you start wasting. You waste transistors, you waste integrated circuits, you waste microprocessors because they're so cheap that you don't really care if you're using them efficiently or not. And in fact, for example, our cell phones, all those gadgets that we use today have microprocessors that we probably are using only 5 or 10% of their whole capacity. So my question basically is, how far do you think we are, given the rapidity by which solar and wind prices, for example, are coming down? How many years or how many decades we are from the point where like information is so cheap today that we don't even measure the value anymore. Whether how far are we from that point where energy will be so cheap that it doesn't matter if you orient your solar panel this way or that way, or as long as you get the energy, you'll get more than enough of it. Thank you.
Who wants to answer that question? I think what he's talking about is rebound effect. You know, when things become cheap, you tend to overuse it or waste it.
But if I got your question right, you're asking about when energy is so cheap, right? I mean, what we're seeing is, I mean, the trend in the solar energy business, at least, is that
What happens is that when things become, like, for example, transistors, and when they became so cheap, they are used so widely that they replace other things which are more expensive than them. So there's a huge substitution effect that is still going on today. That's why IT is disruptive, because it is substituting this very cheap microprocessor, memory-based gadgets are replacing all the more expensive ways of doing things. And when energy reaches that point, then there will be another huge substitution effect that will do more or less the same thing.
Yeah, okay, got it.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so I'll be as quick as possible here. In the electric power business, I think within 5 to 10 years, we're going to see that the cost of large-scale solar power is going to be routinely down to like 1 cent per kilowatt hour. And I could probably quote somebody else on that, but that's my guess based on the current cost trends. The cost of storage is going to come down enough that solar plus storage is going to be cheaper than coal, and coal won't get any cheaper. And then we're going to see a major disruption where, you know, this notion that coal 40 or 50 years from now is still going to be this huge chunk of the electric power business, I don't buy that for a minute. In the transport sector, the tipping point we're going to see within a couple of years, and I'll use some numbers from the US market. When the retail price without subsidies of a battery electric vehicle with a 200-mile range gets down to the median price of a new car